You are 19 years old, hanging out the open side of a helicopter 1,000 feet above the jungle, 100-mile-an-hour wind in your face, 2,000 rounds of ammunition between your boots, and the only thing keeping you from falling to your death is a single strap of nylon clipped to the floor behind you. There is no door. There was never a door. The crew took it off back at base because a door just slows you down when you need to lean out and fire. The machine gun in your hands will glow red and warp into uselessness if you hold the trigger for much more than a minute. And below you, somewhere in that jungle, are men with rifles who have been told exactly what you are and exactly what you mean. Out on that tree line, there is a rule about you. Their commanders have worked it out the hard way, in blood, and passed it down to the men waiting in the grass. The rule is not complicated. When the helicopter comes in and you see the gunner in the door, you do not fire on him first. You do not draw his attention.
Because the soldiers who did learn that putting the single round toward that doorway was the last decision they ever made. That rule was real. But the reason behind it is bigger than any order. And it is the reason an army of hundreds of thousands of men ended up rebuilding the way it fought an entire war around one teenager hanging out of a helicopter. This is why they feared him that much. Start with the seat, because almost nobody gets the seat right. You've probably heard that the door gunner was held in by a bungee cord around his waist. That is wrong, and the truth is better. What held the gunner was called a monkey strap, a torso harness bolted to the cabin floor that let him stand in the open doorway, lean his whole upper body out into the wind, and fire down and behind the aircraft without falling to his death. The bungee cord was real, but it did a different job. It held the machine gun suspended from the cabin roof, so the weight of the weapon was off the gunner's arms. Now, here is what kind of men these were. Many of them took the monkey strap off. They unclipped the one thing keeping them in the aircraft, because the harness would not let them reach a target tucked into the corner of the doorway, and they wanted the target more than the strap. Those are the men you heard about who fell out of helicopters. They did not fall because the equipment failed. They fell because they had unclipped the only thing holding them in to reach the enemy. That is the seat. Now, look at who was actually in it. He was almost never a man whose job was door gunner, because in the Vietnam-era Army, that job did not exist on paper. There was no door gunner training pipeline, no door gunner badge, no door gunner career. The man on the left side was a helicopter mechanic.
His official title was Single Rotor Utility Helicopter Repairer, military occupation 6/7 November 20, and he had been trained at Fort Rucker, Alabama, to fix the engine, the transmission, the rotor system, and the wiring of the Huey. Sit with that. The same young man who spent his morning on the flight line with the wrench, signing off that this helicopter was safe to fly, climbed into it that afternoon and rode it into combat as its gunner. If it failed in the air, it was his aircraft at his signature. Mechanic and gunner, same body, same machine, same day. The man on the right side was often a volunteer. Infantrymen who had spent months in the mud and the leeches volunteered to fly, trading the ground war for the open door, lured by flight pay and a dry bed, and the idea that the sky had to be better. Some found out it was not. Their average age was 19. Their pay was around $100 a month.
The weapon those teenagers fired was the M60 machine gun, and it had a flaw that should have been fixed before the first one ever left the factory. The barrel had no carrying handle. Every machine gun barrel gets blisteringly hot in sustained fire, which is exactly why guns are built with a handle to grab it. The M60's designers left it off. So when the barrel overheated in combat, which took about a minute of real firing, the gunner changed it in the open doorway in a 100-mile-per-hour slipstream while possibly still taking fire, handling a barrel that was glowing visibly red. He did it in asbestos gloves because there was no other way to touch the metal. Standard equipment was 4 spare barrels for each gun. Some crews scrounged 6 because on a heavy day, a single door gun could burn through 2,000 to 3,000 rounds, and barrels that hot do not last. And he could not hear any of it. The noise at his station ran past 115 decibels, beyond the human threshold of pain.
He could not hear his own machine gun firing 6 feet from his face. He could only feel it, hammering through his hands and his chest. And nearly every gunner who flew a full tour came home deaf in the range where that sound lived. Now you understand the seat, the man, and the gun. Here's why the enemy feared all three. It comes down to 60 seconds. Veterans call it the golden minute, when a Huey came down into a landing zone to drop troops or pull out wounded. It had to slow, drop low, and commit. In the last stretch of that approach, it is bleeding from 70 miles per hour down to a hover, a few feet off the ground, with no speed left to dodge and no altitude left to escape. The escorting gunships have to peel away to avoid hitting their own men.
The artillery has to stop so it does not hit the helicopter. For about 60 seconds, the troop helicopter is naked, and the only protection it has in the world is the 2 teenagers in the doorways and their machine guns. In that minute, the door gunner is the entire defense. He puts a wall of fire into the tree line so the men waiting there cannot lift their heads to aim. Every 5th round is a tracer, so from the ground, his fire looks like a solid rope of red light reaching down out of the sky and sweeping the woodline. 2 gunners, 1 on each side, walking that rope across every place an enemy could hide. If you are the soldier in that tree line, you have a choice. Shoot at the helicopter, and the instant you do, your muzzle flash gives away exactly where you are. That rope of tracer fire swings onto you, and seconds later the gunships come back and turn your position into nothing. Or you do not shoot. You stay down. You let them land. That is the choice a door gunner forced on an entire army, and here is how that army answered it. After the Battle of the Ia Drang Valley in 1965, the first time the Americans tried this air mobile idea at full scale, the North Vietnamese commander studied what had happened to his men. His name was Huey. Years later, he explained the lesson his army drew, and it is the real reason for this whole story. He said the answer to American helicopter firepower was to grab the Americans by the belt buckle. He meant it almost literally. Get so close to the Americans so fast that the helicopters and the artillery could not fire without killing their own men. Close the distance until all that firepower, the door gunner included, became useless because the 2 sides were tangled together.
At the Ia Drang, North Vietnamese soldiers fixed bayonets and charged the American perimeter rather than fight at a distance where the sky could reach them. This is the rule the men in the tree line were really living by. Not a written order pinned to a board, but something harder and more total. An entire doctrine built to never be caught in the open where the helicopter and everything it carried could reach them. And the door gunner sat at the very tip of that fear because he was the closest piece on it. The door gunner was not feared because he could not be killed. He was feared because of what he represented. He was the closest, fastest, most immediate piece of a machine that could deliver more violence in 60 seconds than the enemy could survive. Shooting at him meant pulling the entire weight of American air power down onto your own head.
So, the North Vietnamese built a doctrine designed to never be in the open when the Hueys came. Disperse under the jungle canopy. Break contact the moment the helicopters arrived, unless you had enough men to overrun the landing zone before help came. An entire army learned to fight around the teenager in the doorway. He was so dangerous that the enemy reorganized the war to avoid giving him a clean shot. Some of the men in that seat did things almost impossible to believe. On the 8th of January, 1968, a door gunner named Gary Wetzel rode a Huey into a hot landing zone near Ap Dong On. He was 20 years old. He had 10 days left before he was supposed to go home. It was the 5th time in his tour he had been shot down.
The helicopter took heavy fire and went down. As Wetzel moved to help his aircraft commander, 2 enemy rockets exploded right next to him. The blast nearly tore his left arm off his body and tore shrapnel through his right arm, his chest, and his left leg. It threw him into the rice paddy. You will hear that Wetzel lost both arms and kept firing. He did not. He lost his left arm, and the man is still alive to correct anyone who says otherwise. The correction takes nothing away from what he did next,
because what he did next is past the edge of what a body should be able to do. Bleeding out, his left arm hanging by ruined tissue, Gary Wetzel got up out of that rice paddy, climbed back to his gun, and started firing again. His machine gun was the only effective fire left in that landing zone. He found an enemy automatic weapon that was tearing into the survivors, and he silenced it. Then he passed out from blood loss. Then he woke up and tried to drag his wounded crew chief to safety before passing out again. He lived 6 months in a hospital, over 400 stitches.
His left arm was amputated. In November of that year, the President of the United States put the Medal of Honor around his neck. Gary Wetzel is alive today, and he is the only Huey door gunner of the entire Vietnam War to wear that medal. 1. Across a war that put thousands of these men in the doorway, only one door gunner received the nation's highest award for valor, and that scarcity is its own quiet horror. The job killed men too fast and too anonymously for the medals to keep up. There is one more man you should know, and his story only became public in the last year. His name was Hugh Nelson, a Huey pilot. In June of 1966, his helicopter was shot down. Nelson got out, went back into the wreck for his crew chief, and dragged him clear. Then he went back a second time for his door gunner, who was trapped and unable to move while North Vietnamese soldiers fired into the wreckage from 30 feet away. Nelson got the door gunner free, and then, with no way to carry him to safety in time, Hugh Nelson lay down over the wounded man's body and used himself as a shield.
He took the rounds meant for his gunner. He died there. The door gunner lived because of him. It took until January of 2025 for Hugh Nelson to receive the Medal of Honor. His children, 1 and 5 years old when he died, accepted it 59 years late. His is the only Medal of Honor in the war given for an act centered on saving a door gunner's life. The men in those aircraft would die for each other, and the door gunner was the one most likely to need it. There is a reason you always heard the Huey before you saw it, and it is the reason this aircraft is the most recognizable sound in the history of war. That deep chopping whop-whop is not just blades beating the air. The Huey had only 2 rotor blades, turning slowly, and each one left behind it a spinning tube of disturbed air, an invisible vortex trailing off its tip. With only 2 blades, that vortex hung in the air just long enough for the next blade to come around and slam straight through it. Blade hitting the wake of the blade before it, hundreds of times a minute. Engineers call it blade-vortex interaction.
Everyone else calls it the sound of the Vietnam War, and it was loudest at one specific moment, when the helicopter tipped into a descent. The rotor wash piled up under the disc, and the blades cut through their own vortices harder than at any other time. Which means the Huey was at its absolute loudest in exactly the moment it was coming down toward a landing zone. So, the sound carried ahead of it, down and forward along its line of approach, announcing it before anyone could see it. To the American grunt pinned in the jungle, that sound was rescue coming. To the Vietnamese villager, it was either food and medicine or a raid. And to the soldier in the tree line, it was the warning building louder out of the descending sky that the door gunner was 30 seconds out. One sound, 3 completely different meanings, and the only people for whom it meant the same thing every time were the men in the doorway, because for them, it always meant the golden minute had begun, and the next 60 seconds were theirs to survive or not. He was 19. He sat in an open door, with no door, held by a strap he sometimes took off. Behind a gun that cooked itself red in a minute for $100 a month. The men in the tree line had a rule about not drawing his fire, and the rule was real, but it was only the surface. Underneath it was a whole army that had changed the way it fought a war, rather than face the teenager in the doorway in the open. That is what the rule was hiding.
He was so dangerous, they reorganized the war to keep away from him.